This story comes from one of our lovely viewers. If you have a story that you want me to read on the channel, you can send it to StoriesForAries@gmail.com, and it might just be featured in an upcoming video. This happened when I was 15, in late 2009. I grew up in rural Denmark, and believe me, I have seen some bizarre things in the 20 years I lived there until I moved to Copenhagen. It was shortly after sunset in November when my friend Ina texted me saying I should come up to her place, which was not far from where I lived. It was already dark when I went up there, and I didn't think too much of it then, even though it was already kind of unsettling, particularly when I crossed by a certain little mount close to where she lived. She stood in front of the building she lived in, and at first she got me up to her room. She seemed rather off, and she immediately told me what bothered her once she closed the door. She told me that in recent days, whenever it had become dark, she had noticed a tall, slender man stand underneath a streetlight down the street, and that he was a creepy weirdo. At first, I didn't think much of it, thinking she was exaggerating because she was venting out her frustrations about something in school. When we went outside and we walked a few meters down the street, we stopped, and that's where we saw him. Several meters away, he stood there, under a streetlight, leaning onto it. He was tall, slender, and he seemed to kind of glitter or sparkle under the lamp. I could not really see his face, except that I could see a wide grin even from afar. He didn't move, except once among the times that my friend yelled slurs at him. And no, I don't think my friend should have done this. He just didn't move. And when he once did move, he turned his head in our direction. There was something off about it. It's hard to describe. We also never went further down to him. It was like there was a boundary that prevented us from doing so. Not to mention that I didn't want to be closer. But speaking of my friend yelling in his direction, that's where I noticed that the entire neighborhood was silent. Not just silent, but it seemed like the lights in each of the houses and buildings were off. It was actually as if life itself was switched off, and I otherwise heard nothing. No birds, no dogs, no cats, nothing. It was just plain silence. I asked my friend to stop, and we went back to her place. After an hour or so, I went home, and boy, did I not look forward to the walk down to my place after that encounter. As I walked down to the street, I made sure not to look in the direction where this man stood. As I went down the hill, something told me not to look back and to only go straight forward. And then I noticed the silence again. There's a highway on the other side of the already harvested cornfield, and there was no traffic there and no sounds. This silence was truly unsettling. And this is one of the first times I experienced the so-called Oz factor, which I didn't know the name of until last year. This manipulated reality stopped the moment I opened my door to my home and my dog greeted me. The next day, when my parents were out working, Ina called me and said she wanted to come to my home, saying she had nightmares the previous night and that she felt that this man was after her, even if she couldn't see him. Ina arrived very scared at my house, and a few minutes after her arrival, my dog began barking hysterically outside, and I had never heard him growl or bark this hysterically. We went outside to the garden, and Ina said, "It's him! It's him!" But we only saw my dog barking in the air in the middle of the grass around the swing. Despite the fact that we didn't see anyone, I could feel the presence of someone, and I'm sure it was the man from the previous night. We went inside, took my dog in too, and we went to my room where my friend laid on my bed, having a bizarre seizure and basically entering a strange vegetative state and didn't respond to me. This lasted several minutes. It almost felt like I was doing some kind of exorcism, as I constantly cried out to God for help, even though I had no idea what was happening and what I was doing exactly. And in case anybody wonders why I didn't call an ambulance, keep in mind I was 15, I didn't want any trouble, and no one would have believed any of the stuff I have told that had happened before the seizure. Suddenly, she woke up from that state, and she simply said that she had passed out. Nothing happened over the next hour, though everything felt really weird. We never spoke of the encounter afterwards. It was only a year later that I learned of the Grinning Man, how he had been seen around Point Pleasant during the time the Mothman haunted the place in the 60s, and how terrified people have been of that grin. I should mention here that he is often lumped together with the entity of Indrid Cold. But apart from grinning and probably being from space, these two entities don't have anything in common, as Indrid Cold was able to properly communicate with humans and had an interest in humanity. Around the time I learned of who the Grinning Man was, another friend told me that her brother and his friends had an encounter with him in the forest in daylight. It was the previous year, and maybe even during the same time when I had my encounter. They had a walk in the forest, and then they saw someone from the side. Under the shadows, they saw this tall, slender figure, kind of greenish, staring at them with wide eyes and a wide, fixed grin. They all ran away in terror from what they saw. I love how despite that this entity has been seen by many around the world, still essentially nothing is known about him whatsoever. I do hope that I never have a similar encounter again, yet I would personally love to hear other people's encounters with him.